It is very nice to be with you this morning. I say morning because I happen to be in the US, and therefore we have some time difference at this moment. And I should also say, of course, it's not the first time that I get the chance and the pleasure to talk. Now, the question I suppose that we are trying to address here is what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean. And in a way, this is it's an old story, because you all are aware of the bilateral dispute between Greece and Turkey with reference to the border settlement, and in particular the delineation of the continental shelf between the two countries, which of course is an ongoing dispute that goes back in time, and in which none of the two countries have had as yet, I think, been able to find the formula that would allow them to settle that question. Now, the reason why the Eastern Mediterranean area, the region as such, has become more of a problem in recent years, I think is down to a few important factors that I would like to start with. The first is what seems to me to be a rather elusive attempt by governments in the region, and that would include both Athens and Ankara, to make use in the future and potentially of hydrocarbon exploration in the region. Now, one important thing to mention is that there are indeed certain discoverable without a high amount of cost potential sources of raw minerals, particularly gas, which have been explored by multinational corporations and through the cooperation of the government of the State of Israel, within the territorial boundaries, the water boundaries of which some of those seem to be located. So the Leviathan in particular seems to be an opportunity here for certain governments, certainly for the Israeli government, to move forward. I personally doubt, and I think that's an important thing to say early on, that there is anything which is going to be of importance and of substantial value with reference to Cyprus. And I say this because a lot of the debate in the Eastern Mediterranean region in recent times has focused on whether on the one hand you can have a resolution of the Cyprus dispute by utilizing the potential benefits that the two communities, the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities, would be able to derive from a solution once they're able to, for instance, engage in joint exploration, or if the Republic of Cyprus was to explore these, then to offer a fair share to the Turkish Cypriot community. It seems to me, by talking to energy specialists that are looking into the region, this doesn't seem to be feasible, neither financially, so there doesn't seem to be enough out there in terms of future use. And there also doesn't seem to be enough now in terms of the sunk costs that companies would need to be involved in order to derive enough benefit. In other words, probably when it comes to hydrocarbons and the Cyprus dispute, we are dealing with a red herring. We are dealing with we're dealing with a fantasy in which governments are quite eager to engage for other reasons, namely for political reasons. And I mention Cyprus, of course, this early in our discussion, because I think that there is one inevitable reality here, which is that the way in which future cooperation can be mapped out goes through Cyprus, and of course the resolution of the Cyprus dispute. In recent years, we have had two main big opportunities. There have been two main occasions in which a resolution appeared in sight. The first was back in 2004, when the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan tabled a plan which I think that overall was realistic enough to be accepted, by the two sides, yet it wasn't. It was accepted by the Turkish Cypriot community, but not by the Greek Cypriots. And then quite a number of years later, in Cannes Montanain in Switzerland in 2017, we had again a realistic shot at the resolution of the problem, which again led, this time in a slightly more complicated manner, to another failure. And therefore, I think that this series of lost opportunities in resolving the Cyprus dispute has also added to the tension in the region, precisely because it seems to me that the available window of opportunity, the possibility of resolving the Cyprus dispute is becoming more and more remote. And of course, one of the reasons is the one that I just mentioned, that is to say fatigue and the belief that the issue cannot be solved. But at the same time, we have important change on the ground, so to speak. And by saying important change on the ground, what I mean is the recent results that we have had in the elections in the northern part of Cyprus, where we now have a president who is openly calling for and advocating for a two-state solution. And I should say this is quite surprising in the sense that the international community was used to be dealing with leaders on both sides of the Cypriot divide, which at least theoretically were committed to the idea of a confederal, bizonal, bicommunal, and yet one single state. And of course, what we also have at the same time, making things certainly more complicated, is what appears to be a new stance on the part of Turkey, which is of course one of the main protagonists here. It now seems more and more possible, I don't think it is 100% certain, but it seems more possible that Turkey will align with that position and also advocate for a two-state solution, arguing that a lot of time has been lost, and therefore it's better for the international community to look forward to a two-state situation on Cyprus. That is, of course, something that, if it is to be confirmed, will make things exceedingly difficult to actually resolve the problem, bearing in mind that one would need the consent both of Nicosia, of course, of the Cypriot government, and also of the Greek government. And so I wanted to begin with this discussion on hydrocarbons and Cyprus, because what seems to me significant is that the context in the region has changed, and to be precise, has worsened. It has deteriorated significantly in comparison to a few years back. And here I want to draw a line between two periods. The first is the period during which Turkey's foreign policy was not only aligned with the desire for EU membership, and that is the period in the early 2000s, but it was also implementing what you have all heard, or was trying to implement, the zero problems with neighbors policy. And that was, of course, an umbrella term, which I think, however, had a certain reach in other countries. And it certainly created the impression in countries like Greece, that we are talking about today, that resolving bilateral disputes was not only possible, but it had become a lot more feasible since Turkey was committed to the idea of its EU membership. Now, we all know how this played out. Over time, things deteriorated, and the very much improved Greek-Turkish relations of the period after the Helsinki summit of 1999 met with a certain plateau. So they met with a certain maximum out of which they couldn't move. And that was the period pretty much until 2010, 2011. I should, of course, add to this that, as you know, there are different levels of diplomacy. And when one focuses on the high levels of diplomacy, there was a lot of interaction and exchange between Greece and Turkey during those years. We had no resolution of the border disputes, the dogfights in the Aegean, and so on. But we did have, and the optimist inside me says we still have, a much more successful track to diplomacy. And by track 2, what I mean is the civil society exchanges between peoples of Greece and Turkey. Peoples who had come much closer together following the tragedy of the successive earthquakes that hit both countries in 1999, and who then were able to open up new joint ventures of collaboration, of exchange, of tourism, student exchanges, and so on and so forth. And I think this is a dynamic which hasn't gone away. And that's something we need to keep in mind, because high politics, track 1 diplomacy has deteriorated. I'm not so sure that track 2 has. Of course, there is one factor here which is very significant and allows me to move to the second period I want to highlight today. And that is the period following the election of the Syriza government in Greece in 2015, on the one hand, and the attempted coup d'etat against Turkey in 2016. These are very significant, momentous events, I would argue, and I will try to explain why they have played a role in deteriorating relations between Greece and Turkey in this region. So when the Syriza government got elected in 2015, that was, of course, a completely new scenario that no one had seen coming. The Syriza government under Alexis Tsipras was voted in due to the austerity policies that were implemented in Greece earlier. And one of the biggest promise, the reason why they got elected, was, of course, this idea that Greece is now going to get rid of austerity. Now, we know they didn't get rid of austerity, but for our purposes, what matters more is, of course, the fact that for the first time in many years, Greece had a left-wing party which was meant to represent a more internationalist attitude with regard to things like conflict resolution. And of course, Turkey has been the foreign policy item number 1 for Greece ever since I can remember. I think ever since the Greek state was formed. It's probably true that Turkey has dominated Greek foreign policy, and it certainly does until today, especially after the outstanding issues that Greece had with North Macedonia have been resolved, and the two countries are now seeing eye to eye. They're cooperating on so many fields. I think Turkey has become the only one really that Greece is, I don't know, maybe obsessed with, but certainly very much interested in. So when Tsipras became prime minister, the question was, how will this left-wing party in coalition with the right-wing nationalist party, they didn't have a majority, so they had to create a coalition. How will they work with these right-wing nationalists? And I think that with regard to Turkey, the answer is a bit mixed, because there was a defense minister in Greece, the leader of this right-wing nationalist party that was in coalition with Syriza, who continued a belligerent rhetoric towards Turkey, who argued that Turkey is a revisionist power. And I should say that this is the overwhelming, almost universal motto in Greece, that Turkey is a revisionist country that wishes to revise the Lausanne Treaty, revise borders, revise the status quo in the Eastern Mediterranean, and therefore poses a threat to the country. On the other hand, I think the Prime Minister and people around Prime Minister Tsipras were much more willing to keep the channels of communication open with Turkey. To give you an example, Tsipras invited President Erdogan, he had moved from being prime minister to president in Turkey, in Athens for the first state visit after 50 years. The opposition was up in arms, arguing how do you bring Erdogan in Athens now that his rhetoric is so aggressive against Greece and all the rest of it. And yet Tsipras did it. And I think that was really an attempt to try and say that we may have the disputes that we do, but we have to make sure that we continue talking. I don't think it actually led to any concrete results, but at least it allowed for the possibility of open and frank dialogue, which is necessary to resolve disputes and try maybe to correct some misperceptions about the other. Of course, the second major event we had then was the attempted coup d'etat against Turkey, this tragic summer of 2016, where so many people suffered and so many people lost their lives in Turkey. I should say that in Greece, this was a very big event. I think Greece followed, and the Greek people followed developments in Turkey on the ground live, so to speak, with live TV coverage dominating media headlines throughout that period. And of course, it's also true that the Greek Prime Minister was one of the first to phone President Erdogan, and of course, mention his solidarity to the Turkish people and the Turkish president following what was an attempted overthrow of an elected government. And as you know, Greece has a history of these things. We had a 7-year dictatorship in the 1960s and 70s, and developing a democratic culture against coup d'etats is a very significant component of how Greeks see themselves. And I think that was an act of necessity at the time, but also an act that was appreciated in Turkey. However, the aftermath of the coup d'etat led to a deterioration, a very visible deterioration in relations. And the argument was made early on in Athens that Turkey is now turning more inwards, that there is a growing tendency within Turkey to consolidate. And there is also a growing tendency, and that relates to Greek-Turkish relations, to create a sort of form of a coalition government with the nationalist party in Turkey, which will not bode well for Greek-Turkish relations. And I think that this perception has been confirmed to the extent that in recent years, and certainly over the summer of 2020, Turkey has sought in the Eastern Mediterranean to demonstrate its ability to be an active player. And I think what is different in comparison to the past is that it has done so not solely based on political rhetoric, but by real action, by practical moves on the ground, by sending out exploration ships, by openly disputing agreements that Greece, for instance, has reached, as in the case of the Greek agreement with Egypt on the delimitation of their exclusive economic zone. And Turkey has been a very proactive player, therefore, both in the diplomatic front, striking agreements with the then transitional government of Libya, but also on the military front. And I have to say that one of the reasons why the Greeks feel particularly worried and not very optimistic about the possibility of resolving disputes with Turkey is because their impression is that what you have now, for the first time really, is a Turkish Republic which is not shy anymore to actually send troops abroad, to create naval bases abroad, in places such as Qatar or Africa. To make sure that the Turkish army is engaged on multiple fronts, and therefore to utilize the potential that it has been able to create, its investment in the national defense industry of Turkey, to project an image of power. And let us be very, very clear here. I don't think that the Greek-Turkish conflict can be resolved through an application of power politics. I think this is almost impossible, because the balance of power in the region is fairly fragile on the one hand, because Turkey's military prowess, which is very significant, Turkey's military strength is undisputable, can be matched and controlled, and I think that's what Greece is currently doing, through alliance building on the part of Athens. Athens has built a broad alliance in the region, which goes beyond Cyprus, which has been the traditional ally of Athens, let's say. But it does involve countries like the United Arab Emirates, Egypt very significantly, and he has also been able to call on other EU actors in the region and beyond, predominantly France, of course, which has led to an alliance between the two countries, leading to the sailing of the De Gaulle ship, the warship of De Gaulle, in the region, in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think what we have at the same time, and through different sort of forces, if you like, is both a heightening of the rhetoric, as well as military exercises, which find place very close to one another. And therefore the immediate, I think, attention has been paid on avoiding a wider dispute. We came very close to such a dispute last summer. The possibility of small scale, hopefully, military skirmish between the Turkish and Greek Navy in particular became a very real possibility in the Aegean. This was averted, and it was again averted fundamentally through international mediation. And the most important role in that process has been played by Germany, which has been the one power that Turkey felt was in a position to mediate between the two countries. This is not to say that we are out of the woods. I think the situation is extremely fragile on the ground, and that is because although talks, the so-called exploration talks between Greece and Turkey have begun again. Last month, the 61st round took place in Istanbul. The next one is supposed to take place very soon, this time in Greece. It seems to me that this appears to be more of a maneuver. This appears to be more of an attempt to gain time and not really an attempt to seriously discuss the agenda the two countries have. And therefore, the extent to which they will continue is really a big question mark. Please remember that exploration talks between Greece and Turkey began in the good days that I started my lecture from. They started back in 2002. They continued all the way until 2016, so they took place for 14 years. There were 60 rounds of talks. They brought up little result, although in 2003, 2004, I think there was real progress being made, and the two countries came close to reaching an agreement. In the last minute, that wasn't possible. And so we have a 14-year period, then we have a 5-year break, because conditions on the ground became very, very unstable. Turkey, as you well know, suffered from a massive amount of political instability, terrorist attacks, the attempted coup d'etat, repeated elections, change in the constitution. So many things happened. And so the idea is that maybe now we can make a new start by way of trying to make sure that at least there is agreement that the outstanding disputes need to be discussed, rather than be the result of some kind of military confrontation or end up on that level. There are other international players which are important here. NATO is one of them, although the credibility of NATO is quite low in disputes of this nature. The change of administration in the United States will play a role. In the previous administration, the personal relationship between the two presidents of the US and Turkey allowed or seemed to create the impression of a void on the part of the US, that the US was in a way removing itself from the traditional role of mediation in Greek-Turkish disputes. The new Biden administration, I think, is going to be a lot more active in trying to make sure that things do not get out of hand. So there are certain reasons to believe that progress can be made, but I'm afraid, and this is one of the things I would like to stress, I'm afraid that there is little prospect for it fundamentally because of the role that domestic politics now plays in foreign policy calculations. You are all the students at our university. You have been hearing about these things from me and from other colleagues for a number of years. The foreign policy, domestic policy nexus has become very complicated. And facts on the ground do not seem to allow for such an improvement. Let me also add one last dimension, which I think is significant, and that is the migration and refugee crisis of 2015-2016. You all know that Turkey has played an absolutely central role during that crisis, both because it has hosted and continues to host millions of Syrian refugees. The highest number of any country recorded in the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. But Turkey has also played a very important role for the Western camp, so to speak, not only as a host country, precisely because of the EU-Turkey agreement, through which it has been able to keep a lid, so to speak, on the number of migrants and refugees that cross the Aegean, end up either in Greece or further west in the European Union. Now, in some respects,